Welcome to episode 1 of Get the Word with Mike and Alexandra. We are going to talk about picking apart the English language, looking at etymology, that is the history of words and the connections that we can make with modern history and other historical periods. I will be releasing these from time to time on the podcast, but also on the Patreon. Patreon supporters will get exclusive episodes of Get the Word. I really hope you enjoy this. It was a lot of fun to pick apart these words. I gained some keen insight from Alexandra, who is not only my girlfriend, but a PhD candidate through the University of Arizona in anthropology. So she brought an interesting look into the discussion of language, and we will have many more discussions going forward. Write into the podcast, Mike at EnglishSessionsWithMike.com, or reach out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter with any suggestions. Are there any words that you want us to pick apart? Do you want to get the word, meaning understand the word? This is... of course, an English learning podcast, but these episodes of Get the Word are definitely for advanced and even fluent speakers. I hope this is an interesting conversation for fluent and native English speakers as well. If you have any questions, write in, and thank you for your support. Hello, everyone. This is the first part of a series of episodes. Primarily, maybe half and half are going to be on the podcast, half on the Patreon. I'm going to record these with my lovely girlfriend, Alexandra. Alexandra. It just sounds so weird saying. Okay, she normally goes by a different name, but I don't want to set off a bunch of devices in everybody's homes of all our listeners. This is going to be more for advanced learners and also just any native speakers who are interested in etymology. I've explained in the podcast before, it's kind of my nerdy hobby, and Alexandra has an interest too. She's been helping me out a lot with this podcast, and these past couple of weeks we've been talking about homage and tribute. What were we watching just last night that mentioned one of those words?
We were watching I, Claudius.
Right. An old BBC miniseries from the 1970s about ancient Rome. We'll probably get into the use of that word. Obviously, in ancient Rome, they weren't using that word in English, but perhaps the word does have a tie to Latin. Or is it because homage does?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Yes, it does have a tie.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, so who wants to go first?
Why don't you go first?
Okay. So I did homage or homage. I'm going to get into that too. We talked about that in one of the podcast episodes. What do I want to mention first? Okay, so I used a couple sources, and I'm going to put my notes up on the podcast. I don't know if you want to, Alexandra. But I just figured we'd post. I'd at least post mine. I have a few links. Etymonline, that's ETYMONLINE.com, is a really helpful resource. It's kind of like a jumping off point for me. According to that website, the earliest use is 12th century English, and this word has changed in meaning quite a bit. If we kind of break apart the syllables, homo, or the first syllable of this is related to homo, Latin, just man, so that kind of seems obvious in a way once I finish the definition of it. Back then, it was a word that much more meant just related to or concerned with the relationship between a feudal lord and a vassal. And I just want to make sure everybody knows what a vassal is. That's a holder of land. It's a word that we don't really use very much in modern English anymore. At least I never really hear it. but it's someone who was given land ultimately. A holder of land by feudal tenure on conditions of homage and allegiance. Now, this is where I thought it got pretty interesting. Some of those earliest definitions had to do specifically with a ceremony that this person, the vassal, would perform, in which the vassal would declare himself the Lord's man. So it's literally saying, like, I am the man of this Lord. And this is the celebration that I'm going to perform to prove to you that I'm worth your land. I have a more to say about that because I kind of went into the feudal state in England at the time. But back to the word itself. So it's tied to vassal. It's tied to this relationship of power, and so the way that we use it more often now, its modern use didn't come around until, let me make sure. I think it said the 14th or 15th century. Yes, the figurative sense in the way we use it now is honor shown, just like Reno pointed out, and a couple other students too, from the late 14th century. So it still really dates back pretty far, just that broader sense of just showing respect or honor to someone. But that idea of ceremony is still very much tied into it. Wouldn't you agree? Like if we pay homage to someone, pay homage. It's typically some sort of ceremonial thing, or there's some sort of reverence.
Well, you also have, works of art, film, music. They can pay homage to a previous work in adopting a style or something. So that's not necessarily ceremonial.
Right. Very true.
Yeah. Very,
very good point. Okay. And so I kind of wanted to do more of a deeper dive on. So we know homo is man. And the ending, the AGE, we see a lot of that with French words related to English. I wrote down a couple of them, like fuselage, for example, sabotage. There's a lot of words that have that ending, and I was just curious, like, is that just a noun ending, or do you happen to know?
I don't know. Fuselage, sabotage.
Right.
Did you mention one more?
No, I didn't. Homage.
It's not act of. I mean, sabotage, that's an act of saboteuring or whatever.
Right. It's still a noun though.
Right. Well, yeah. I'm just thinking if the AG, how some suffixes turn something into a noun, because I guess
fuselage.
What would the verb be for fuselage?
I'm not sure, but I looked into this word a little bit because it is related to body. I thought I wrote this down. Okay, here we go. Le fuselage. It can translate as the fuselage, like how we use it on a plane, which is what? Just like the main body of the plane, pretty much, right?
Right.
But it also, according to the translator that I used, can translate to body.
Okay.
So I don't know. I don't know if that's related at all. If any French learners are listening, or anyone who knows any more about this, I just thought that was really interesting. I also wrote down the definition of a French term, homme. How would Homme? Homme?
I think it's homme.
Okay, homme vassal, Vassal, can translate to liege, which is a liege is concerned with or relating to a relationship between a feudal superior and a vassal. But again, that home related to body. There's like a lot of ownership of, I don't know, mentioning of, or a man, I guess, like, yeah. So it's a relationship between a man. I guess that doesn't, but it's all tied in. And so then I think that word came first, and then you saw the word homager pop up, which is a vassal. So like you had that term vassal, but then this became a big part of the the structure, I guess, of the feudal state.
So like the ER or OR suffix meaning a person who.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, painter,
Actor.
actor, podcaster.
Amateur.
What would you
Amateur.
Amateur. Yeah, amateur. So homage, homage. I mentioned, I think the first time I mentioned this word, I hope I at least said that it's often without the H sound, but that is an accepted pronunciation. Okay, so I have a lot more.
Okay.
Should I keep going, or do you want to?
Maybe I'll jump in with tribute, so the kind of basic definition and etymology, because I'm seeing some interesting links and similarities with homage. I don't know. I guess it depends on what you have
More,
to talk
just
about.
more of the history, more of the history of feudal states.
Oh, okay.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of history. All right, so tribute, I thought I would start with the definition I found. I believe this is the Oxford
Okay.
Dictionary. I just blanked on the name of the most important dictionary in proper English speaking. So the Oxford Dictionary definition for tribute. The first one is an act, statement, or gift that is intended to show gratitude, respect, or admiration. And that's how we typically understand tribute in modern usage. An ABBA tribute band is one example they gave.
Right.
Or paying tribute to someone.
Mm-hmm.
And the second one is historical. Payment made periodically by one state or ruler to another, especially as a sign of dependence. And then the third one, also historical, which I didn't really look into. I think this would be an interesting thing to look into, but it didn't have a lot, I think, to inform this discussion. A proportion of ore or its equivalent paid to a miner for his work or to the owner or lessor of a mine.
That's very specific.
It's very specific. And I think it comes out a lot later than these other. So all these other uses of the word tribute developed before this one did. And it's an industry term is what it seems like.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. As far as the etymology, like so many of our words, can be traced back to Latin, tributum, which is tribute, a stated payment, a thing contributed or paid. We can trace the word to the Latin tributum, and for a long time it was used in that historical sense, a stated sum of money or other valuable consideration paid by one ruler or country to another in acknowledgement of submission or as the price of peace or protection.
The price of peace.
Mm-hmm. And so when we watched I, Claudius last night, and I got really excited because they mentioned the word tribute, and I poked you, and you're like, God, shut up.
We're big nerds.
Because
Grammar
we're big nerds. They were talking about conquering the German tribes and exacting tribute from them. So that is, as the price of having been conquered and been made part of the Roman Empire, these other groups of people now needed to pay them money, but it could also be goods, like, I don't know, sheep or chickens.
Yeah. Or ore.
Or yes, any of those things. Anything valuable.
Right.
And so tribute was then a system used by a lot of civilizations in order to gain protection, maybe as a form of allyship, where you would submit to the supremacy of another nation state or another group. And we see this way far back all over the world. Like I saw examples from China and Mesopotamia, Babylonian civilizations, too many histories to kind of go down that rabbit hole.
So it's interesting that both words that have, and I explained in the podcast, have very different backgrounds, have a similar history in that they're both tied to some sort of hierarchy of power, and the lower ranks of those that power structure showing respect, and either homage, like showing the ceremony, showing that, like, proving that I can be your man, that can tend to this land, or in tribute, like a country that's been, I guess, like that Germany and Rome example would be, because at that time Rome was or the dominant power over Germany. Right. Yeah.
And so I think what's important with tribute is that there is an element of coercion historically, because of the dominance of one over the other, whether it's violent coercion, as they talked about in I, Claudius last night, or coercion in the form of seeking protection or the threat of violence.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. So you pointed out how they have a similarity. And I just want to make a quick side note. So according to my research online, the sense of offering, gift, or token is first recorded in the 1580s. So first you have this kind of nation state use of tribute. It's political, it's economic. And then it starts to spread or blur the lines of how that word is used in the 1500s at some point. And you have something that perhaps is not coercive, or at least obviously coercive, an offering, a gift or token. And I wasn't able to find at what point it becomes figurative to the way we know it now. So I'm going to talk about how I see tribute differing from homage. So they're both play into systems of power, and of a more submissive entity paying up towards a dominant entity.
Yeah, it's funny we still use it that way. Pay. Yeah.
That's the point that I wanted to make later, but we can make it now, is that it's really obvious how paying tribute, how we use the word now, is a figurative use of paying literal tribute, because we still use that word pay for both, pay homage, pay tribute.
Even though, from what I can gather, the way homage used to be used there, I didn't see any actual, like, monetary exchange. It was like you know what I'm saying? Because let me read that definition again. The original use of the word denoted the ceremony by which a vassal declared himself to be his lord's man. So it actually first related to the ceremony. But it's interesting, that now in modern English usage, we say pay homage or homage or pay tribute.
They've kind of started to coincide as far as meaning. Although I think that we could probably talk about some fine, what's that word? That connotations to using homage versus tribute. And when one is used, when the other one isn't, like a tribute band, for example.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the part that I found really interesting, I kind of dove into was, and we had just mentioned this before starting recording, is what is the etymology of Roman words? Right. So a lot of times we trace English words back to Latin, and then kind of stop there. We're like, oh, we found the origin, but clearly their words had to have come from somewhere.
Right.
So tribute, which comes from the Latin tributum. When I did my research, I was a little confused. And there seems to be a double and or contested origin or meaning to that Latin word. So I saw a source that talked about tributum or trib as pay, to pay. Or maybe tribere, I'm not sure. You might want to edit that part out where I start to make up Latin words.
That verb would be like the
To
way
pay,
you just...
yeah, to pay, to allot, to assign, to grant. Oh, noun use of the neuter of tributus. There, I just saw my notes. Tribuere, to pay, assign, grant. But there also seems to be some kind of link to the idea of tribe.
And tributary, I just checked. Sorry, go on.
Way to steal my thunder. Yeah, so, which the Latin for that, I guess, is tribus or
Okay.
tribus. And so you can also talk about this idea of a lot among the tribes or to a tribe. So where does tribe come from? Oh my God. See, I went down a rabbit hole.
Good.
So tribe comes directly from the Latin tribus or tribus, one of the three political or ethnic divisions of the original Roman state. So you have tri or tri, meaning three, and potentially b, which is root of the verb be, so an early form of the word to be.
Right.
Or some other people talked about treb, meaning a dwelling, but I find the other one more compelling. Tri, for three, and b, to be, so three beings. And I think that this origin in the word tribus or tribe points to how tribute became a form of submission among groups of people. So it's not, or classes of people.
So what were the three? I was about to say three tribes.
The three,
but
yeah. Well, that's what they said on the, or three ethnic divisions.
Ethnic divisions.
Yeah. Rhamnus, Lucerus, and the one that makes me giggle, Titus or Titius.
Okay.
And I tried to look up the right way to say it, and that's the closest I could come.
Okay. But bottom line, there's an ethnic division broken into three parts.
Right.
Or three separate groups, you could say.
Yeah. So three beings, tribe,
Yeah.
and then goes into tributus, which becomes tribute. And then over time, so from coercively paying goods or money, valuables, for protection and or submission, that softens to become a gift or an offering, and then eventually a figurative, non-concrete, giving someone an honor, honoring someone. It's kind of a wild trajectory.
Yeah, and I guess just based on changes in history, based on my research with Homage, that feudal system state kind of broke down. But of course, there's a lot of still hierarchy and class structure that exists, but I guess we've just decided to soften the use of that word anyway. I wonder, in modern day use, there probably is somewhere in which you could use, like a context in which you could use it that way still, and they probably
Taxes?
taxes. No, I mean, I know what you're saying, but specifically use of that word, I guess. But I guess that would be the same meaning, in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that they probably, nation states, threw away the use of tribute as it became more and more desirable to become democracies, or at least democracy seeming.
Yeah, and I just thought of something that, a word that eventually has a pretty negative connotation, society will want to get rid of it or change it. Maybe everybody started kind of having that. I don't know. As society changed, they don't want to think about that word in that way. So either like replace it or change the meaning or soften the meaning. Yeah.
And I think it's also really it's significant that we talk about the meaning and the practice of both homage and tribute in the 1500s, late 1500s, possibly 1600s, because then we're talking about the Enlightenment and changes to both people's relationships with God start happening, people's relationships with monarchies, with knowledge. All those things start to happen around that time. So if and or when we continue to do this, I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of shifts in the meanings of words right around that time.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that specific period because, well, okay, before I get into what the rest of that I have, do you have more to say about tribute?
No, I think that's basically it.
Okay, and maybe what I have to say will trigger something that you've researched, but that specific, so that website that I use, etymonline.com, also mentioned a use of this word as a verb. And so I was so curious, because like in modern, usage, we never see a use as a verb. And it was a very specific date. It says 1590s. And I was thinking about that time, like what was happening at that time? That was the time that Shakespeare was alive, right? Mm-hmm. And so I was trying to, like, what I wonder, he had such an impact on the language that I wonder if he was playing with the word. But I couldn't find a use of homage as a verb from Shakespeare. So I've tried to find the earliest use of it as a verb that I was able to research. And let me see, I'll pull it up. So this is from The School of Patience by Jeremias Drexel from 1640. And you might have to look at my computer screen here because it's hard to read. You know how S's kind of looked like big F's back then? It's kind of hard to read the writing, but it says this. But I, alas, being conscious of my own weakness, give way and yield, and fix 100 times in a day do I homage and obey. Right? Do I... fix 100 times in a day do I homage and obey. That would be its use as a verb. I homage.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And then there's obey. It almost looks like there's like a little, what's the dash when you split up a word and the rest of the word goes in the...
Hyphen?
Hyphen. Thank you.
A hyphen?
It does look... I know. I'm an English teacher. It does look like... It does look like a hyphened word, but then on the next page, there's S or F, A-N-S-E. Or obeyance. Wait, here, come take a look at it if you can.
Okay.
We'll pause.
Oh, God. Okay.
You see that word?
Obeisance?
Yeah, obeisance isn't a word. So, I don't know. We must be reading it wrong.
Obeyance. It's...
Obeyance, maybe.
Yeah, no, it's obeisance. Because look, adversary. Yeah.
To my mighty adversary. But maybe it's not a hyphen. I don't know. So that's debatable. And so I found another one from 1850. And it comes from the Theological and Literary Journal, Volume 2. And again, this might not be used as a verb. I can't decide. Talking about God, it says, for the views he expresses and enforces in his government of his title to homage as the majesty of heaven and earth. Or to homage as the majesty of heaven and earth. Let me read that again. Referring to God, for the views he expresses and enforces in his government of his title to homage as the majesty of heaven and earth. So, I don't think that's a use of the infinitive to homage, or is it?
I'm confused.
I know, and we don't have context, and I don't want to get too much into this religious text and mention some words that I know are not, I'm not going to get into it. But
right.
Bottom line, there is some sort of history as a verb, but it was really hard for me to find. So there is a history of it as a verb. I believe so, at least according to etymonline.com, the online etymology dictionary. Great resource. I have a few other things that I want to mention, including just some text from this great course, Lumen Learning course. You ever hear of Lumen?
Mm-hmm.
So
is this an ad? Is this an ad?
Maybe they'll sponsor us. So the structure of the feudal state in England. I wanted to just research what was going on in England at the time. And so I'm just going to read this, and it's about the vassalage and feudalism. So feudalism in 12th century England was among the better structured and established systems in Europe at the time. The king was the absolute owner of the land of the feudal system, and all nobles, knights, and other tenants termed vassals merely held land from the king, who was thus at the top of the feudal pyramid. Below the king in the feudal pyramid was a tenant-in-chief, generally in the form of a baron or knight who was a vassal of the king. So everybody was a vassal. Holding from the tenant-in-chief was a mesne, M-E-S-N-E tenant, generally a knight or baron who was sometimes a tenant-in-chief in their capacity as holder of other fiefs. Below the mesne tenant, further mesne tenants could hold from each other in series. So it seems to be just going lower and lower, but the king being the ultimate owner of all the land, but then everything was tiered below that. So everybody was, in a sense, almost everybody was a vassal who was below the king. So no wonder that this word is still, it held on in the English language for so long. I mean, it had to have been a pretty important word. But I just want to describe a little bit more of the ceremony too. So before a lord could grant lands to someone, he had to make that person a vassal. And this was done in the form of in a formal and symbolic ceremony called a commendation ceremony, which was composed of the two-part act of homage and the oath of fealty. We've already been covering a lot. Maybe I'll just say, I don't know what that is, but fealty.
Faithfulness or loyalty.
Okay.
Loyalty.
Okay, so, very similar because homage was a way of showing loyalty. Anyway, during homage, the lord and vassal entered into a contract in which the vassal promised to fight for the lord at his command, while the lord agreed to protect the vassal from external forces. Whew! So, very interesting. Now, every time I hear that word, I'm going to picture that kind of structure. Okay. And I already said the figurative sense in the way that we use it now from the 14th century, late 14th century. And I just wanted to end on something from the New York Times. I see you typing away and looking up stuff over there, so I have a feeling you have some more to say. Do you want to mention what you were...
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm just looking up some stuff. First of all, you said 14th century, but I think you meant 15th century or 16th century?
The modern day usage?
Yeah.
Well, no, according to my notes, it says... that the figurative sense, closer to how we use it now, is from the late 14th century. When I mentioned,
wow. Interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mentioned the 1590s before because that's the first earliest recording of it as a verb. And I was wondering if I had to do with any of the playwrights or writers at the time fooling around with the language.
Right.
But I couldn't find any.
Well, so what I was looking up is, oh God, this is going to get into such a rabbit hole.
Hey, well, we're already half an hour, 40 minutes
my
in, so we
God.
might as well.
I hope you edit a lot of this out
No, I
because
won't.
there's a lot of
I don't plan to.
Really?
I think it's good.
Okay. So 1450s, mid 1400s, you have the printing press, right? Also around that time, you start to have the Reformation, the rise of Protestantism, which fundamentally changes Western man's, using those words very purposefully, relationship with God. Kind of cutting out the middleman, so to speak, right? So you're no longer paying, say, tribute to the Catholic Church. If you're Protestant, you are communing more directly. Both of these developments allow the person to commune more directly with God. And as this develops over time, you get the rise of secularism and the move away from like these centralized locations as sacred spaces. But that's a whole nother rabbit hole. But what you can see then is like it's kind of power is dispersing from these hierarchical organizations that have historically relied on ceremony and material wealth to bind people to them. And around that time, so this last thing I was looking up was feudalism, which also starts to disintegrate, I believe, in the 16th century-ish. And from what I'm seeing, and also what I'm remembering from like 8th grade history or something, is that it starts to disintegrate because it becomes more and more possible to have centralized powers.
Wow.
So like empires again, as opposed to feudal states, which are these kind of more dispersed, smaller city-states or nation-states.
Yeah.
So I guess my point is that not just playwrights, but a whole swath of cultural and social changes and technological changes prompting a shift in how a word is used.
I wanted to mention a couple more things. I have some information from a New York Times article. Back in 2010, there was, I think it was a question that was posed to this writer, Ben Zimmer, about the word homage. He says, a few years ago on the radio, I was jolted to hear this word pronounced homage, a real stomach turner. Since then, I've heard a real stomach turner. How dramatic, right? I should put some dramatic music behind this. Let me read that again.
Maybe you should put dramatic music behind it like it's a review.
I know. A few years ago on the radio, I was jolted to hear this word pronounced homage, a real stomach turner. Since then, I've heard this pronunciation fairly frequently on the radio and occasionally on television. Are the broadcast folks cooking up a new pronunciation, or do they intend some other word than homage? I thought that was kind of
rude,
pretentious, and like, I mean, language is always changing. I mean, that's what I think about all the time, and it's sometimes it's hard to explain to my students, because they want to learn English, and I don't know. Let's say certain things that I hear from my Chinese students or my Brazilian students, or I think a better example is my European students. Eventually, if enough learners are speaking that way, it's going to become part of the language, and we're going to see huge shifts, I think, in the English language if it stays as the language of global language of communication, business communication, and travel.
I have a confession to make.
What?
It's so embarrassing. So embarrassing.
What?
I only knew homage until you started talking about homage a few weeks ago.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, but like, and that's a perfect example. You're a native English speaker. So, I mean, how could you say that's wrong? I guess this person is claiming like, why is that? They want to know why this is, becoming more prevalent in the culture, I guess. And so, Ben Zimmer, he talks a little bit about homage and homage, and I don't feel like getting into that. So yes, sometimes the H is pronounced, but what I found interesting is this part. He says the shifting status of homage is further muddied by the modish French-influenced version, and I had to look up modish too. Have you ever heard that word? Or it might be modish. Modish sounds better, but modish. Okay, both pronunciations in Oxford, modish or modish, conforming to or following what is currently popular and fashionable.
Oh,
So
yeah.
trendy. Bottom line. Okay, the shifting status of homage is further muddied by the modish French-influenced version homage. Strictly speaking, that pronunciation ought to be limited to artistic context, where the French word homage, or homage, the French word homage, he's saying that is the French way to say it, or closer to it, has been reintroduced into English as a term for a work that respectfully emulates that of another artist. Something similar happened with the word auteur, which cinephiles borrowed from French to refer to directors with distinctive styles, even though the word had already entered the lexicon centuries ago as author. That is a really good comparison. I don't necessarily feel like this guy is the authority. I don't know. Or how could one person just be the authority to say like this ought to be limited to artistic contexts?
Well, but I think that is almost exclusively how I've heard the word homage, which I'm going to just hold on to. And then in my head, it just bled over to other uses of the word. So primarily if I heard someone saying it out loud, oh yeah, this is an homage to Picasso or whatever.
But what about pay homage? That sounds strange to me. Just
right. Now that we are talking about it, it sounds strange to me. But in my head, you know how you like pronounce things in your head, even though you have no idea if it's actually right, and you stumble over it if you actually try to articulate out loud.
right.
But I think that is probably part of the process of words bleeding and blending.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
The homage pronunciation is gaining a foothold beyond the arts world, and for some, that's a cause for alarm. Well, first of all, I will admit that I don't know who this guy Ben Zimmer is. Maybe he's oh my God, why am I blanking on words? Someone who studies
Etymologist.
Yeah, a linguist. Yeah, maybe he's a linguist or an etymologist. Is that a real
Someone
thing
has
study?
to be one.
Right. So, okay. So I don't know his background, but I mean, he's definitely acting as an authority here in the matter.
He's a linguist,
Yeah.
lexicographer, and language commentator.
Like that's the word I was looking
Oh,
for.
lexicographer. Okay.
Okay. So he is an authority on the matter, I guess. But I still feel like these kind of statements, like saying that something ought to be or something should be used this way, I don't know. Like maybe.
Well, now you're getting into social politics.
I am.
And
So
gatekeepers.
okay, but this is what he says. The homage pronunciation is getting a foothold beyond the arts world, and for some, that's a cause for alarm. In his book, The Accidents of Style, Charles Harrington Elster calls this a preposterous de-Anglicization that is becoming fashionable among the literati. Elster has previously complained that good old homage was losing out to homage in havens for the better educated like National Public Radio. And for defenders of the H pronunciation, homage just adds insult to injury. So I think he means the H homage? He wrote the H pronunciation homage, and he's writing it out phonetically.
Homage?
I know, but with emphasis on mage, without... He writes homage phonetically without an H.
Oh, okay.
A check of NPR's audio archives corroborates Elster's hunch. Listening to 10 recent uses of the word homage by on-the-air personalities, I found an even split. 5 for homage and 5 for homage, with the latter generally reserved for the respect meaning, as in pay homage. I would argue that, what's the term? Collocations? Like when just you see two words together or more than one word together, that it becomes a pattern that people get used to. I would argue that maybe some of the difference in pronunciation is just the other words that you're using with it. Because he just says, he says it's because we're using it, when we say that we're using it as a way to show respect, but then he gives you a specific example, pay homage. And still in my head, pay homage sounds really strange. For me, it's more just the pairing of those two words. But anyway, the homage pronunciation, meanwhile, seems to be losing out to its trendier H-less rivals. Oh, the my bad. He did write this phonetically. The homage pronunciation, meanwhile, seems to be losing out to its trendier H-less rivals, despite the protestations of traditionalists. Protestations, I meant to say.
This is getting so confusing.
Despite the protestations of traditionalists, and since it's a fight of two against one, a homage may over time become increasingly rare.
I'm going to just say it, and maybe you should edit it out. But all this sounds just like a Make America Great Again argument about language.
Yeah, I feel like it kind of smacks
but
of that.
I'm pretty sure they'd be real angry at me
and this
for
is this
likening
from the New York
that.
Times.
I know, exactly.
Yeah.
But a purity argument about language also kind of takes me back to that horrific Ebonics movement, where people are like, oh, that's Ebonics, blah, 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 and like the kind of fetishization and separation of forms of English and othering of forms of English.
Yeah.
Yeah. But maybe you should edit that
out. No, I mean, that's, honestly, I don't censor myself. But I agree. I think that you probably have more well-formed thoughts and opinions on that because of your background. But yeah, I mean, something about that, I couldn't read it without having that kind of, without filtering it through that same kind of idea. I couldn't just read it without automatic. And this guy's supposed to be someone who obviously is well respected enough to write for the New York Times Magazine. But anyway, everyone listening,
it's interesting information.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And I would imagine, honestly, the homage pronunciation, I mean, to use words like trendy, like, and to me, it feels like it's going more back to its roots. And I don't see what's wrong with that, because if this is from an Old French word, originally, like we talked about, Middle English from Old French, and then older from that from medieval Latin, that H would be silent, right, in the French pronunciation. And of course, and they talked about homage would be closer to the French pronunciation. So I don't see anything wrong with that.
Well, I mean, I think this all circles back to a point you made before, to kind of an offhand comment, though, about the globalization of language, and especially of English as kind of the go-to language for business and communications, for better or for worse. But then, obviously, it's not. It's a feedback loop, right? Like other languages and other speakers, like you had said, will influence how we speak, including homages, homages.
Yeah, and I think that's a good place to end. I don't have anything else.
No, me neither.
Very good points.
Beaten this horse to death.
Okay. Well, if anybody else feels that we can beat it even more, write into the podcast, Mike at EnglishSessionsWithMike.com, the website, EnglishSessionsWithMike.com. We're on Facebook. Alexandra is kind of in charge of the Instagram, because I have no idea how to use it properly. And you can reach me on WhatsApp through Facebook. It's an interesting feature that they have. And I'm on Twitter. And more content, much more things to look at on the website, www.englishsessionswithmike.com. Thanks for listening, everybody. Want to say goodbye?
Bye.
Bye.